Welcome everybody. I'll just wait a moment for everyone to come into the room before we formally start proceedings today. Ina mana, ina reo, rangitira mai, tēnā koutou. Kia koutou, te tangata whenua, ngā te whātua auraki, e mihi nui, kia koutou e tēnei wā. Kia tātou te hanga ora, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou, tēnā koutou katoa. I would like to acknowledge the original custodians of Australia and pay our respects to the elders, past, present and future, for they hold the memories, the traditions, the culture and hopes of Indigenous Australia. Hello everybody, I'm Sharon Wood, General Manager of the Circle here in New Zealand, and on behalf of the Circle and our partners Pluralsight and ServiceNow, it is my pleasure to warmly welcome everyone attending, as well as our guests of honour, Ross McEwan, Group Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of National Australia Bank, and Angela Mentis, Managing Director and Chief Executive of BNZ. Today is the inaugural briefing in our Trans-Tasman Economic Series, which will feature joint briefings of CEOs of our major Trans-Tasman companies over the next few months. Ross and Angela, we are delighted to start the series with you, and we look forward to welcoming the CEOs of Bunnings Australia and New Zealand next Friday. We especially thank our major partners today, Pluralsight and ServiceNow, and welcome their representatives with us today. David Oakley, Vice President and Managing Director Australia and New Zealand, ServiceNow, who will introduce our guests of honour formally shortly, and Nigel Lindsay Smith, Enterprise Sales Director APAC for Pluralsight, who will summarise our discussion later on today. I also thank the support from Enlighten Operational Excellence and Palo Alto Networks and welcome their teams who are with us on the line today. We are delighted to have Fran O'Sullivan moderating the conversation today. Fran is Managing Director of NZ Inc. and a prominent columnist for the New Zealand Herald, where she writes on business, politics and international affairs, and as well managing the annual high-profile Mood of the Boardroom. Fran is a great friend and supporter of the Circle, and it's wonderful to have you with us today. Thank you, Fran. I also acknowledge and welcome Johnny Weiss, Founder and Managing Director of the Trans-Tasman Business Circle, who will formally close today's event. Just a reminder that the format today is a moderated Q&A session. We encourage you to place your questions in the Q&A field. With such a large audience, we're not sure we'll get time to get through all of them. We do apologise in advance, but we will, however, pass all the questions along to BNZ and NAB following the session. Finally, a reminder that we are on the record and recording today's event, and we welcome the members of the media in the audience with us today. I'll now hand over to David Oakley to formally introduce Ross and Angela and to get us going. Thank you, David.
Thanks very much, Sharon. It gives me great pleasure to introduce Angela and Ross as part of the first instalment of the Trans-Tasman Economic Update series. ServiceNow is proud to work with National Australia Bank, helping them to move with speed, simplicity and focus, and enabling the bank to continue to put their customers and colleagues first. Like the bank, ServiceNow is focused on supporting our Australian and New Zealand customers through what has been a year like no other. We appreciate the opportunity to continue to serve many of you on the call today as you accelerate your digital transformation, creating great experiences and unlocking productivity for your employees and customers. Let me introduce Angela. Angela was appointed CEO and Managing Director of BNZ in January 2018. She's been a Director on the BNZ board since December 2016 and has extensive business, retail and institutional banking and wealth management experience, spanning more than 29 years. Angela was previously Chief Customer Officer, Business and Private Banking with BNZ's parent company NAB, a position she held from August 2016. And secondly, to Ross McEwan. Ross became Group Chief Executive Officer and Managing Director of National Australia Bank in December 2019. Ross has more than 30 years of experience in the finance, insurance and investment industries. Ross is a senior global financial services executive with deep experience in international markets and long-standing knowledge of the Australian banking environment. Ross also has extensive experience in leading organisations through significant change and recovery. Prior to joining NAB, Ross was Group CEO of Royal Bank of Scotland from 2013 to 2019 and CEO UK Retail from 2012 to 2013. We appreciate both of your time today and certainly look forward to the conversation. I'll now hand over to our moderator to start today's session. Thank you.
Thank you so much also there, David. I mean, terrific to have both Ross and also Angela on the panel today. An almightily intriguing time for New Zealand. We face an election in 2 weeks. You've got a budget coming up in Australia next week. And we've had 6 months or more of COVID. I mean, it's the most extraordinary time. So just to both of you, what is our pathway to recovery? I mean, we've been bogged down. You're bogged down in Melbourne. We're still waiting in Auckland to get to level 1. I think if I start with you, Ross, give us a bit of a perspective there.
Thanks very much, Fran, and thanks for having both Angie and I on the session today. Look, it's been an extraordinary time. Just to give you an example, I haven't seen physically my executive team for 6 months. We haven't been together. Of course, we've been on Zoom calls. I've got, other than our branch staff, about 95% of our colleagues are actually working from home. Who would have thought that just 6 months ago? And we've got customers, about 10% of our business customers and slightly more of our home loan customers on deferral of both principal and interest. We've never seen this before. Look, we don't know whether at the start, the middle or the end of this COVID, there's still a long way to go. We've never seen one before. So I think we just have to play it as it comes at us. And that's what we've certainly been doing. And I've been delighted with the way that both governments on both sides of the Tasman, I think, have done a superb job of working through the unknowns to date. But, you know, we need to find a plan out. We need to find a way of actually operating cross between New Zealand and Australia. We need in Australia to find a way of opening up our own borders and getting business going again for the sake of this economy and staying safe at the same time. So I think we've got a way to go, but we've got to get these borders open between Australia, New Zealand and within Australia as our first big step.
Thank you. Angela, Angie, your own perspective, you know, obviously Australia's side, but you're actually talking here for BNZ in New Zealand. So how do you see it?
Yeah, thank you, Fran, for having me. And you're right, the most unusual of years, and I don't think any of us could have predicted anything like it. So likewise, in New Zealand, the Bank of New Zealand helped about 23,000 mortgage customers and several thousand business customers as well. We've got about 8 billion of support. And the pleasing thing is about 60% of those as they come up are going back to their principal and interest. And about 64% of our business customers as well, which is pleasing, but there's still a lot of support in the system. About 23% of our customers are on wage subsidies, etc. In fact, as of August this year, we had a 68% increase in our customers being on some form of wages, income, bank support, which is just extraordinary. So there's a lot to play through. And it's interesting because in a normal recession, you know, you would get most of the people and businesses facing a similar cycle, and really it would be the extent of the impact. Yet here, there's been quite a diverse difference, and in some sectors, even, you know, businesses within those sectors and industries just very, very different. But we are seeing some green shoots where we're seeing, you know, the housing market is beyond belief in terms of how hot it is. We are seeing our agricultural sector performing incredibly well, and really their challenges are more environmental and labour shortages. And we're also seeing a lot around the companies and businesses that are digital and digitally enabled are doing incredibly well. And you would have seen our Q2 results in terms of GDP like completely collapsed. But we see us coming out through that. So a little bit of a funny W, a bit of a bounce back in Q3, and I think Q4 will be the same. But we've got a long way back, and as we know, our tourism and hospitality sector is incredibly impacted as other regions that they are in.
Yeah, but we're in New Zealand, we're about to come off that ventilator support, if you like, as the wage subsidy comes off. I mean, what are you know, obviously this is going to place some tension. What do you really want to see in New Zealand to actually get the recovery side going?
I think the government, as they have in Australia, have been extraordinary with their support and their swift action. And I think the Reserve Bank as well, and the banks equally. I think there was a lot of responsibility on all of us to protect Kiwi jobs. And I do think we have absolutely done that by and large. I think we're having conversations with every one of our customers, and I know my colleagues at the other banks are as well. I think it's important that there is confidence in the system, because confidence allows business investment and it allows people to hire. And I think there is a lot that the government can do to ensure there are jobs. You know, we're undergoing a skills shortage and right across New Zealand. So how do we help more New Zealanders be upskilled in technology, be upskilled in skilled agriculture, engineering and other things, because they're the jobs that we need. And I speak to customers every day, and you know, they're the things that they need support with. I think there needs to be less red tape and regulation. I mean, they're the things that businesses struggle with. And then how can we make sure that there is that return on innovation? How can we encourage innovation and collaboration of big businesses and small businesses to really make sure that we can all face into this together and be at the table, you know, rebuilding New Zealand together.
Mm-hmm. I mean, Ross, you talked about earlier about this getting the borders open, obviously within Australia, but also with New Zealand. I mean, we are in a sweet spot, aren't we, if we can make this work, our two economies?
We certainly are, Fran. And one of the big things for Australia is to actually find a way of opening up nationally and learning to live with the virus, because this virus isn't going to go away in a hurry. When we get a vaccine, you know, we've already seen what 50% of the people said, I'm not going to take it. So we need to find ways of living with this virus for quite some time safely, but we do need to get our borders open. And between Australia and New Zealand, the number of cases is incredibly low now and able to be traced in most circumstances. So we're making progress, but we do need to open up nationally. And that was one of the big things that we said to the government. You know, we need to learn to live with this virus and not close down every time we get some sort of upsurge. And you've seen this with Victoria. It's had to close itself down because it was starting to get out of control. But that means we've got to have much better tracing and activation systems when you do have an outbreak, and close those areas down quite quickly, but not the whole country. And the ideal thing is to get New Zealand and Australia operating together. New Zealand has very low cases, if not, you know, 0 cases over the last few weeks. Parts of Australia are exactly the same. We should get those parts open. And we need to get people travelling again to get our tourism industry moving. And one of the interesting stats from an Australian perspective, more Australians travel overseas than tourists come into Australia. The stats are something like $65 billion is spent by Australians overseas and 45 is spent internally in Australia. Imagine if we spent 65 billion inside Australia and New Zealand for that matter, how good this would be for our tourism in the areas that are getting really hit at the moment. And some of these areas, and you know, far north Queensland, which would normally great tourist areas, are really getting hurt. So open up the borders safely, and let's get New Zealand and Australia moving together. There's so much in common that we have.
Ross, you touched on the conversation that you'd had with the government. Tell us about that conversation. What did business say to government in Australia?
Okay, I'll just go back to my first point, Fran, that the Australian government and business and our regulators and the Reserve Bank have really linked arms in this exercise here. And right from the start, because none of us knew what was going to come next. And it's been a bit make up as we go along, but it's been, the government has been very responsive. We put a 5-point plan to them. The first one obviously is let's get the place open. We need to find a way of living with this virus. The second one, there are tax cuts planned between 2022 and 2025. We said bring them forward. And let's get away from this ideological who's getting taxed. We need less tax so that people spend money inside our economy. And we need it quickly to get that moving. The second one was to accelerate infrastructure spending. There are a lot of projects that we could push on right now with, and you know, they call them shovel ready, but there's also a lot of technology projects that we can work on together to make this a better place as we come out of this. So we've said both the shovel ready, but also a lot of digital type programs as well. The next one, residential construction. Standardise what's going on between the states, make it easier for people to start, because we've seen a drop off in the number of new starts coming through. We need to get that moving again. And then the final one, which is vital, and the government's all over this, is just make it easier for small businesses. We are a country, and so is New Zealand, made up of small businesses that employ most of the people in Australia and New Zealand. We need to get that sector going, those small businesses going again, and get moving. So those were the sort of the big five. Our requests are big five, and the government is certainly listening and working very well with business.
Yeah, I mean, there's been similar more pent-up demand, I think, in New Zealand, where business does want more of a direct seat at the table. But of course, we're in the midst of an election, which actually does put a bit of spanner in the works for that conversation. But once it's out of the way, Angela, I mean, just speaking in high-level way, irrespective of what government we are delivered, what would you like to see happen?
There's similar thematics as well. I definitely think New Zealand needs to see the economic return from science and innovation, and how can we encourage innovation and ecosystems. You know, when you look at New Zealand, equally Australia, but New Zealand is a number one place to do business, and we are actually a very attractive place for startups, and it's quite easy to get startups. So how can we bring that innovation? And, you know, I'm delighted to see that Microsoft is setting up data centres in New Zealand, because I think that is going to help us as well. As I touched before, we really do need highly skilled workforce. That is going to help the economic uplift. So how can we better get that training happening that we need across technology? We will need talent from offshore, but how can we, and you know, it should be actually easier to get talent from offshore once our borders are loosened a little bit, because of being such an attractive place to live. I do think we need simplicity in regulation as well. We need to just make sure that, you know, that is what's going to help, especially SMEs. As Ross said, we've, you know, 97% of New Zealand businesses are SMEs, employing 600,000 Kiwis and contributing 37% to GDP. And I think there's work we've got to do around affordable housing as well, because housing unaffordability leads to inequality, and it also leads to less well-being as well. So I do think there's work around there. And then on the infrastructure, equally, we need a well-understood pipeline of infrastructure. What is required from a capital works perspective and funding, and how can we be, you know, just making sure there's no roadblocks to that. And there is definitely a piece around digital. I think there's a lot we can do within New Zealand around digital. We're doing a lot of work to make sure we can upskill our people, but also what tools can we be giving SMEs and other businesses. We saw it through COVID, those businesses that had digital, absolutely more productive, could keep revenue going. So how can we work within our borders and also Trans-Tasman? And I do think there's a huge link between Trans-Tasman for skilled labour, for investment, for trade, for tourism, for, you know, how do we data share on open banking and other things as well.
I think that question leads in quite naturally to what more can we be doing together? I mean, this is billed as a Australasian summit, if you like, economic summit, but what more can Australia and New Zealand be doing together? Perhaps start with you, Angie, and then Ross.
So Fran, I think there's so much that can be done, as Ross touched on, just the tourism. You know, we have such, where with the lifestyle in both our countries, but, you know, 40% of our tourism are Aussies, and how can we make that cross-border help? And you can see that in our tourism towns, they're struggling. And the Aussies travel all year round to New Zealand as well, which is beneficial. Also our trade, how can we make sure that we make that easier? And our trade of services as well, again, one of our major trading partners for imports and exports and for services as well. So I think there's we can do a lot more around that. I also think there is definitely a way that we can share and be more of a digital economy. And I think that's in three parts through data sharing. So how can we remove the impediments around data sharing? How can we also collaborate through financial services and open banking? Australia's a little bit more ahead of us on that journey? How can we share the standards and work on that together? And also digital trade. I think there's work we can do around digital identity as well. And there's a number of projects and collaboration on so many things that I think we can work together on and learn from each other as well. And then the investment piece, again, Australia, a big investor of capital in New Zealand. How can we look at the programs of work that we've got, and what are the things that we can be doing together across those, and what are the things we can learn from each other around automation, around government services that are automated, that we can learn from as well.
Ross?
Yeah, Fran, there are so many things that New Zealand and Australia are so aligned on. We have been so for decades now. We should stay working together very strongly and making it completely frictionless across the Tasman, and that's been the objective the whole way through. The skills piece is a vital one. As Angie said, there are a lot of skilled people required in New Zealand, and you can imagine when unemployment goes up, everyone wants to pull the borders down and stop people coming in because we've got unemployment. Well, I think we should be courageous and open up our borders to the right skills that both Australia and New Zealand need for the economy, and not shut it down. And I can just hear the messaging going on in New Zealand about all sorts of people coming in, when we don't have jobs. We've got to resist that massive temptation to listen to that, because these economies grow on the back end of skilled migration and capital coming into new countries like Australia and New Zealand. We've got to have more of it. And as soon as we can get the borders open safely, we should be making sure between New Zealand and Australia, we are getting the right types of people coming in and bringing in their skills and their capital. I'll give you an example of this. Australia at the moment is growing population-wise by about 0.7% per annum. It's the lowest it's been in decades because we've got our borders closed, of course. It's used to growing at 1.5. So you can imagine the drag on GDP that's having, and the growth that then flows through the entire country. We've got to get it back open and up to about 1.5%. I think that'll happen as we get into 2022. And New Zealand needs to do the same. Therefore, we need to have the infrastructure, which is where you need to put all the investment now, and over the next 12 to 24 months, put the investment into the areas we know will be required for the longer term. And that's where I think we can work very well together. Skills is certainly one. Angie's talked about digital training and digital enablement, certainly. Our government's just announced the strategic manufacturing. And what's really good about that is there are 6 areas that's saying that's where we're going to invest, because this is where we've got a competitive advantage. And New Zealand needs to think about that as well, as what are the 5 or 6 areas it should invest in. And that means leaving some things behind, but go after the areas where you put all of your focus. And that's what a business does. And I think that's what Australia certainly signal it's going to be doing. And the other thing, it's been just about a skills program, building the skills of the people of Australia and New Zealand. And we should be working on that one together as well, because the skills will be very, very similar because of the industry we're in. So lots we can do together. But let's not bury ourselves, put our heads down. We should get our heads up thinking about what will this do for Australia and New Zealand for the next 2 decades, not the next year. The next year is it's mapped out. Let's think about the long-term future and have this coming out of this crisis with anger of, economies really going again, because people will want to come to New Zealand and Australia. And we should never forget that. And that's a good thing.
So just when we're talking about our respective place in the world, we've had the first presidential debate this week in the United States. Very interesting, the relationship between these 2 big major players in global trade, global politics. We are stitched into Asia, are we not? How do we actually make sure that those relationships stay robust? I think we might have lost Ross, but maybe Angela, if you would like to have a go at this.
Thanks, Fran. We are tied to Asia. You look at over 53% of our go to Asia, and in fact that's why a lot of our companies are doing quite well in New Zealand, and a lot of our SMEs, because they've been able to benefit and are having some record exports to those regions. So I think it's incredibly important that we continue to understand the importance of those relations. and the importance of just the trade and the skills and the other benefits in terms of capital flows, etc. And that's where I think the important relationships are, and I think the government's doing a good job at making sure that we're not caught up in any of the issues, and even when Australia has had some stronger words, that we haven't been caught up in it as well.
Yeah. Ross, do you just want to chime in, and then I'll move to the questions.
Yeah, look, thanks, Fran. And I think, look, we've got fantastic relationships with both China that have been forged over decades and with the US for even longer. And these are incredibly important trading partners for Australia, and we need to actually keep those relationships very, very strong. And these debates are, and scraps are going to go on for a little bit, and but we need to rise above that and stay friends with both these parties. Asia is vitally important, but it also shows you've got to be very careful as a business. You shouldn't have all your eggs in one basket. You should be making sure that you've got your own risk mitigants in place, that and not have all your business going to one place, because these things can disrupt you. We as a bank, make sure we're supporting our customers up into all markets around the world that are vital for Australia. We've got a small operation in China, but it's mainly a trading platform for us to help our customers. And Australia has got fantastic relations in China, and I think those will continue to build over this period of time because we're both important to each other, and it's partnerships that will endure longer term.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. I'll just head out into the audience, and thank you for putting together such an interesting range of questions. I think if we start with Timothy Koo, which says, "Hi there, can you please pass my question on?" And essentially it's about how will the banks, including NAB and BNZ, continue to support their customers after the government support schemes are suspended? So what plans do you have to step up and help customers?
Maybe if I start on that, Fran, and then Angie can take it over from New Zealand. As I said, we've got a lot of our customers on a deferral program. For personal customers, we've been doing a check-in at the 3-month point as we go through to the 6-month. We've had about 15% of them say, actually, I can come off the deferral. Thank you. Put me back onto my normal payments. And we're about in the next month to go through those that have been on the 6 months and actually get them back on. I suspect because other than in Victoria, a lot of the economy is starting to get going again, they'll be able to resume their payments, and it's in their interest to resume payments so that they can get starting to pay down their debt from a long-term perspective. But there will be a handful of these from a percentage perspective who will still struggle. On an individual one-on-one basis, we'll have conversations with them. There'll be opportunities maybe for them to go onto interest only, maybe slightly longer deferral until they get their job structuring back. So there'll be a number of things that we can do. The biggest thing I'd say to customers is please just talk to us, pick the phone up. Because it's very hard when you're in a situation that it won't be just the bank you're having difficulties with, it'll be your electrical supplier, you'll have difficulties with, paying the grocery bills. Have the conversation so that we can at least get a program in place for you. And we know we're only one of the number of people who will be chatting to you about making payments, but have the conversation. The worst thing is where customers just stop talking. Then you get on to businesses. And I think you're finding that some businesses are getting back up and running again. We've just got the real estate industry in Victoria back up and running again. So it fell off and stopped basically for some period of time. It got back up and going again and had a great July. And then in August, it fell over again. So they'll get going again. And those businesses will hopefully get going as people can get their homes back on the market. But it'll be industry by industry. Some will be hit harder than others. And we're going to have to work just one-on-one with every one of those businesses to see what we can do to get them through it.
You touched on the deferrals, and there's a specific question from Charlotte Grieve from The Age and Sydney Morning Herald for you. And that's essentially, will NAB consider extending the deferrals beyond March 2021? And I think she would like some clarity.
Yeah, no, look, on an individual basis, we're not going to do it across the board. We'll do it on an individual basis because the best interests of customers is to get them paying again. there's no point in deferring and deferring. All you're doing is building up long-term debt on yourself. So, but we'll do, as I say, we need to do it on an individual basis with customers, not on bulk. And we need to have those conversations, and we'll start doing that over the next few months. We've doubled the number of our team that will make those calls so that they're qualified to have a good conversation with customers. But no, we'll look at individual packaging for each customer that is having a difficulty. We understand the situation. No one, we haven't seen this before. So we're having to work very strongly with both business and with individual customers.
Angela, how do you make those similar types of calls? What are the factors you weigh?
So Fran, initially every single one of our BNZ customers that got any sort of support had a conversation. And that was important because every customer is different, their circumstances are different. Interestingly, many of them initially thought they needed a 6-month deferral of principal and interest, yet following the conversation, some of them were fine, most of them went to interest only. So those conversations are important. Equally, we've been doing the check-ins. So our teams were empowered to either do principal and interest deferral, lower principal and interest, or interest only. And we gave them a variety from 1 month right through to 12 months for interest only. So again, the check-in conversations are incredibly important. We've been supporting those customer conversations with other specialist support as well. Where we've seen that businesses need other viability. We're trying to help with balance sheets, etc. In some of our corporate space as well, we've got our corporate finance team helping there as well. And the good news is we are seeing at this stage about 60% of those going back to normal terms and conditions. But also, I mean, we've been lending consistently about 600 million per month to our SMEs across term lending and housing, and about 670 a month to home lending. And more recently, the business finance scheme has opened up more broadly, and we're seeing quite a bit of demand for that as well from our customers. So we're absolutely there backing them. To Ross's point, where it's not the right thing to do to extend more debt and it's not viable for those businesses or customers, those conversations, difficult conversations, have been had as well.
A question kind of specifically to Ross, but I think it's one which really plays the side of the Tasman too, and it's from Manish Singh. And talking about how banks in Australia, elsewhere, have been the shock absorber for this economy, and well-capitalised positions having saved the economy from what could have been an even worse situation. It talks here about how banks like NAB have continued to lend, and where are we? It's disappeared down, and ensured existing customers continue to lend, and all of that. So what are your thoughts of the roles of banks in this pandemic and beyond? And that's one to both of you.
Yeah, look, a really good question, but I don't think it's just been banks. We've played our part, and we've certainly been doing the lending, as Angie said. Our lending's only off about 3% on a month-by-month basis into the business community, and about 5% off for personal customers wanting a home lending. So it hasn't been dented much at all. So there's still demand there. The thing what we have is we've worked well with the government. I mean, the government has really stepped up with the JobKeeper, JobSeeker, all the programs around lending as well, supporting lending. It's been a joint effort between a lot of parties that have kept this going to this point in time. Now, as some of these programs come off, we do need to move away from this big support to much more stimulus type activity. And, with banks have to have good capital and liquidity, either funding to keep us going, and we are in a very good position. I went out very early in my tenure when this crisis came on, and we raised more capital. Because the last thing I wanted was people to worry about us as a bank. What we wanted to do was be in a position to support our customers, not just through this, but on the way out, because you tend to actually get very good growth coming out of a crisis, and I wanted this bank in great shape. So we've made sure that we're in good shape to help. And this is why banks need capital and great liquidity, because in bad times, that's what you rely on. And the banking system, both here in Australia and in New Zealand, is well capitalised. And so, we've been able to step up. The last crisis was the banks were the problem. We were having to save ourselves. Well, that's not the case this time round. and that's a much better position to be in.
So your view on New Zealand, for instance, the Reserve Bank Governor has decided to think about negative interest rates. Is this the environment for that?
Well, Fran, I've never been a fan of negative interest rates. I mean, I lived up in the UK for 7.5, nearly 8 years with the neighbour being Europe, who went into negative interest rates, and we had a bank in Ireland, which was actually in the Republic, was part of that European community and went negative. And I just can't see how it actually helps long term. And I get the reason why people would think about having that in their toolkit. But I looked at Europe and you could struggle to see, how do you get out of that position? I always think, before you put yourself in the position, how do you get out? And if you go into negative territory, how do you find your way out of that negative territory back into positive? So I think from a, does it really work? We are at such low interest rates today. You're seeing that pushing out into the home market that Angie chatted about. It's going for its life in New Zealand because low interest rates, people can borrow, you're pushing up house prices. What more do you really need? More lower interest rates will just keep fueling it. And the other thing I worry about is, what's the message we're sending to people about their risk appetite? And a lot of older people, who actually don't want to go into risky assets at their time in life, are having to consider going into quite risky asset classes to get a return. And the more you pull it down and go into negative, what's the message you're sending them to those people? Those are the concerns I have with going negative. I understand why you'd think about it as part of the toolkit, but I'm not too sure. You need to understand how you're going to get out before you go there. And I'm not convinced that it's actually going to be worthwhile. There's probably other things I'd do before I'd do that.
Mm-hmm. Perhaps this one for you, Angie. There's been a lot of discussion also and debate in New Zealand about that we're heading toward a period where we'll see bankruptcies, liquidations, receiverships, because it will just be too tough. How do you weigh those kinds of requests you might get for deferrals, deciding which customers that you support and which ones you don't?
Yeah, so Fran, they're difficult. We've got to have the difficult conversations with customers as well, and get them to a position where maybe the best thing for them to do is realise the equity or do something different in that business, or the consumer as well. How can we help them budget differently? What are the other things we can do for them? I think we're also learning as well. It's been great to have Ross come from the UK, where they went through a lot of this during the GFC. I mean, Australia and New Zealand didn't really see it. So we're thinking very differently in terms of our principles around assisting and hardship, because there are a lot of other good practices that have gone before us offshore, where there are different things you can help customers through, and we're doing all of that. And historically, when I look at our the way we've landed into those sorts of things, it is the last resort that you would put. You would sell a home, or you would sell a farm, or you would close up a business. So for us, it's how do we make sure we're helping before that happens, and as a last resort, what are other things we can be thinking about, so that there's no one left on the street. So it's a very different principles than what we would have probably thought about before. And as I said, leveraging what the offshore markets have done, and what Ross is showcasing for us from the UK experience.
I mean, one of the debates in New Zealand recently has been on sustainable finance, and one of the questioners talks about that to a degree by saying how important will a strong climate sustainability agenda be in the road to recovery from COVID-19, and what's the role of banks here to facilitate it? Again, that's an issue of judgment calls. Perhaps with you, Angie.
So I think firstly, Fran, I think society and customer expectations have absolutely changed. And many of our private clients are looking for sustainable and ethical investments. Our KiwiSaver customers are asking the same. Our corporate and institutional clients very much interested in that. I mean, already this year we've issued about 25 billion of primary through a sustainable financing. So I think there's a different conversation. I think also the government now has been very, very bold and courageous and the first in the world. So they've set the pathway for us and the framework. So I think it's actually our job now to make sure that we can upskill our people to understand what that means, have the right settings around that, but equally have the right tools. And we're doing a lot of work around that so we can work in partnership with our customers and actually help them understand their impact and then help them through what are the things that they need to be doing. So I think it's absolutely our job, as you said, to make sure that we are helping our biggest clients and our smallest clients to be more sustainable and to be thinking more sustainably around the stakeholder value as well. And we are absolutely doing a lot of work on both of those.
Quite a lot of commentary about how, you know, like other countries around the world, we're looking at similar pathways, investment into infrastructure and so forth to provide stimulus to the economy. Key questions coming through is how do we actually differentiate beyond that? What is the point of difference in a global domain that New Zealand and Australia could offer?
Maybe if I start there, Fran, New Zealand and Australia are already differentiated in the sense of New Zealand is, you know, the clean, green place, and Australia is just a wonderful place to come on down to, and you know, a great mineral producing country. People want to come to our countries, and this, we should never forget this. Now, let's make sure we get the right people down here. And given what's going on globally and the way the Australian and the New Zealand government have handled the impacts of COVID, just makes this a more attractive place for people to come down to. So I think we're already firmly differentiated. We should not give that away. And the conversation about sustainability just feeds into that very strongly. We just need a path to actually take our countries into a sustainable energy source away from where we've been, and that takes time. And I totally agree with Angie. We need the plans to actually go there and the timeframes that we live with, and that's what we've done as an organisation. But it is transition. You can't just stop one thing and move on to another. We are the largest providers of finance into renewables in the Australian marketplace. We're one of, I think, the 12th largest bank in the world on renewables. But should I get criticised for having 700 million of thermal coal that we're quietly extracting ourselves out of? But, you know, we've got to think, here's an opportunity for Australia and New Zealand now. If we're putting our money into infrastructure, we need to put it into new infrastructure that will be great for the country for the next, 2 decades, not for the next year. And certainly around energy sources is one of those areas that we should be looking at. And how do we support business to get into it sooner rather than later?
Angie, do you want to add?
I actually think that that added to my response as well. We've got a good capability in so many areas in New Zealand. I actually think it's another area that we can learn off each other as well. New Zealand's doing a lot of good things and has so much around renewable, and there's other things we can be picking up from Australia as well. So it's another Trans-Tasman opportunity for the leaders and the governments to be sharing ideas and working together. But importantly, how do we work with our clients and their industries to help them through those transitions and be supporting them through that and helping what that looks like as well.
Yeah, just before we move to, I guess, a few more personal questions to conclude. There's a question here about explaining why is New Zealand's housing market hot while Australia is bracing for property price declines as much as 20%. Come on, tell us.
Well, it all comes back to supply and demand at the end of the day. If you've got a small supply of houses, the price is going to go up when people are coming into the country. You've got a lot of people coming back to New Zealand, Kiwis coming back in, trying to get back in. We haven't got enough supply. You need to have a lot more in the affordable housing brackets in New Zealand to actually take this on. You've got to make it easier for the builders to actually get the permits to get on with the job, because I think that's a problem in New Zealand just as it is in Australia. And you've got cheap money. And again, we'll go back to, if you make it even cheaper, what will happen? So I think we just need to have a look at the causal effect of some of these things. But, you've got a hot market. People want to be in New Zealand. They're coming home. you haven't developed enough of a supply, and therefore supply and demand takes over. And there's lots of money floating around for housing at the moment. Australia, it's interesting, have a look at Sydney. Sydney opened up again, and the housing market opened up again very quickly. And I suspect that even though prices may drift off a bit, by 2022, 2023, when we open the economy up again and get migration coming in, house prices will stabilise and go forward. So it all comes back to supply and demand. Produce more houses, New Zealand, and that solves a lot of the issues. And I know the government's been trying to do that with their housing program, but very small numbers have been built. So we've got to find a solution, which then comes back to skills. You know, do you have enough builders? Well, if you're not letting them into the country quickly enough, you're not going to build enough houses. So all of those things are interconnected, and therefore the skills program and the skills development program, making sure you've got the right materials, the right pricing in the country, all those things need to connect in together.
Okay. Another question for you, Ross, about your thinking behind the decision to reduce direct pay and cancel executive bonuses back in April, and also whether you actually think CEO bonuses should be paid in this environment.
Well, look, I asked the board to support me in reducing and taking out the short-term incentive for myself and the executive in April. And the reason I did that is I firmly believe that a CEO and the senior team should win when customers are winning. And when we saw so many customers having difficulty and also having to cut our dividend for our shareholders, my view was you've got two constituent parties, our shareholders and our customers, in pain. Why should we be actually receiving a bonus this year? So we cut them out. I also took a 20% pay cut at the same time. And so I think there's got to be a direct correlation between we should only win when our customers and our shareholders are winning. And the board accepted that. And the board itself took a 20% cut as well on the back end of that, because they realised the situation that COVID was bringing. And so that's the way, sort of things that drive me, Fran, about, you know, we should only win when customers and our shareholders are winning. And as we get winning again, well, I think, you know, we should be able to be paid for that as well, and as we deliver the results that our shareholders need. But we understand the pain that customers are feeling at the moment. Now, some are winning well, but others I think are having a difficult time, and the last thing they want to see is, you know, bankers winning off the back end of them. That was what drove us. And Angie and the team did exactly the same in the New Zealand marketplace with the support of the board.
I mean, one of the things, Angie, you've had to cope with as well is the impact on your people. And I wonder, through operating a bank in a shutdown, essentially, which is, we would never have contemplated this a year ago, from home, distributed leadership. How have your staff coped, and what mental health lessons particularly do you have for us?
Yeah, Fran, I could not be more proud. We've had 5,000 of our people go to home and work and keep our bank running for the entire period of the lockdown. We still have about 30% of our offices, our 7 offices around the country at occupancy, so still really low occupancy. And they all focused on the customer, and they were available. The normal hours went out the window, and they were available because they knew that our customers were anxious, they were worried, some were frustrated, and they were there for them. So I'm incredibly proud at the hours and the dedication. And many of them, you know, doing it from their bedrooms and their garages and their kitchen tables. So we put a lot of effort into the well-being of our people. We had partnered before this, and I'm so glad we did, with Bannister, and they've been providing counselling services for our people. They've been providing coaching one-on-one, especially for our people that are dealing with the more vulnerable customers as well. We've had over 2,000 of our people that have gone through how to have conversations and how to respond when customers are in difficult situations and when they're frustrated. We've done a lot of webinars, we've done a lot of support, we've done some Fitbit challenges where it's about eat well, sleep well, less sugar. We also set up, because we knew that there were going to be more vulnerability. You know, our branches were shut and only 50 opened for that 7 odd weeks. We set up an over 70s line because we knew that we weren't going to be physically available. So how did we get our customers to interact with us online? And what's been pleasing from that, Fran, is pre-COVID, we would have 20 over 70 a month activate and operate their banking digitally. We've now got about 1,100 a month, and they're not turning back. But it was about the well-being of our people, and we're still not yet, you know, we've changed now, everyone around the world, the way we work, the way we learn, the way we interact. We were on Microsoft Teams as well, and we're on Zoom with NAB, and Microsoft told us recently over the last 90 days, we have done 100,000 Teams meetings in the BNZ and 7 chats. So you can see, and interestingly on the chat, on the Teams, our engagement is higher and people feel included because they're all, you know, they're all chatting at the same time, asking questions. So, you know, we haven't settled into that new way of working, but absolutely what for me has been pleasing is that everyone was themselves on these screens, and they brought their whole selves. So for me, it was how do we bring that culture of inclusivity and care. I was very available during all of that. In fact, I was in Sydney for most of it and still ran the bank, and everyone just came into their own and all focused on our customers. And that's the culture that I want us to have when the new normal settles, and we'll work through what is that new way of working, and we're testing a few things now, but the well-being of our people is paramount, and will continue to be.
Thank you. Just in conclusion, Ross, and I'll get you to talk for both NAB and BNZ, what's the one thing you'll be happy to have achieved this year in relation to the objectives for both banks?
I think the biggest thing is just supporting customers. This is something we've never seen before, and nor of our customers. We saw within 1 week jobs and businesses close down. And just to put it in perspective, Fran, there were 900,000 jobs lost in a 2-month period in Australia. In the global financial crisis, the biggest month was 70,000. So that was the magnitude of it. And then to have, as Angie said, our colleagues having to go and work from home, yet do a fantastic job with customers. In 1 week, we took in our call lines more than we would have taken in 52 weeks. And our colleagues, yes, there were wait times and whatever, and angry customers at the back end, but our colleagues actually took those calls and looked after customers. And I think that was the biggest thing, that, you know, magnificent colleagues with good technology backing them up, able to move quickly, retraining people within weeks that would have taken probably 6 to 12 months in the past, showed how good our colleagues are and our technology stood up. So I think the biggest thing is around supporting customers in a time of complete uncertainty that we haven't seen before. I've been delighted, absolutely delighted.
Well, thank you very much. There'll be a formal vote of thanks from Johnny Weiss soon, but thank you for being such excellent panelists and leaders. There is a huge range of other interesting questions now flowing on, which tends to be the case in these things. So I'd now like to pass to Nigel Lindsay Smith.
Thank you, Fran. Thank you, Fran, and Angela and Ross. It was a phenomenal conversation. Really appreciate the transparency and your discussion points. My name's Nigel. I look after enterprise business for APAC, for Pluralsight, and we're delighted to sponsor the Trans-Tasman series and certainly this event as well. So Pluralsight's a tech skills training platform. We're obviously delighted to have BNZ and NAB as customers, and quite topical actually, considering the conversation that we had. You're now going to see the Circle's business sentiment poll pop up. So I'll just give everyone a moment to populate that, and we'll get the results out towards the end. Great. So those will come up shortly for you. So look, thank you again for the conversation. A few things really resonating. One, certainly, obviously, the amount of people working from home, and Angela and Ross, both your thinking around, you know, sort of what you're doing to engage them and to help drive them and keep them motivated. Really gratifying also to see that you're putting your customers at the center, and Angela, particularly the concepts of working to support the SMEs in New Zealand through digital support, and, you know, also talking about how you guys can help with, or are helping advise around, you know, the tourism investments, etc., and also investing early, looking at investing early in capabilities that we need within Australia and New Zealand moving forward to prep ourselves for, you know, post-COVID. But one of the things we talked a lot about, and it came up at pretty much every question, was the skills shortage that we've got within the region, and the opening of the borders to allow us to bring some skills in. And at Pluralsight, we have a platform. It's a platform that allows us to help benchmark technical skills across an organization, and it aligns with then creating content that's going to allow them to expand their skill set or grow it. And recently in April, we ran a free April month, and we had over 1 million new subscribers come into the platform, specifically investing time and effort to learning and updating skill sets. And many of those, you know, have retained being customers, and we can see this concept and this habit of people looking to constantly be evolving their skill sets and capabilities around their current roles and potentially future roles. And I'd love to get some further insights at a later date around, you know, sort of how you guys can see that, you know, manifesting itself over being driven from a top-down approach to ensure that people have got the ability to take the time to go out and learn and, you know, sort of improve their skill sets. It could be a long time before we get people able to come in from overseas. So our position at Pluralsight is really helping our customers dive in and work out where they can drive the best value and the best value in the training time for their staff, particularly while they're working from home. But look, it was a phenomenal discussion. As I said, thank you so much. As a NAB customer, I'm very gratified to hear the levels of support that you are giving to your customers, but also spending time with advising our governments and the leadership of our countries. It's very gratifying and much appreciated. And I'd like to hand over to Johnny.
Thank you very much, Nigel. And the results of our poll, how do you feel as a business person? Most are challenged now. Generally, the government's doing a very, very good job. This has been consistent in our program. Over 12 months, we're going to be waiting. Return to office. How many are you returning? You'll see the results there. And would you attend a business briefing that's moving up to much more physical? So to Ross and Ange, thank you so much for a wonderful session. It's been a fantastic program. We really appreciate it. You live the essence of the circle, which is realistic optimism and the road to recovery, but even more so, celebrating the best of both countries. A Kiwi living in Australia, an Aussie living in New Zealand. You represent the skills and the opportunities that we have together. Thank you so much for joining us. Thank you again to ServiceNow and Pluralsight, and Fran, thank you for fabulous moderation. Thank you everybody for joining us today. We have more in the series, the Trans-Tasman Summit. Have a good weekend, everybody, and thank you again for joining us. Goodbye.